So I was sitting there looking through all my files and realized that I've avoided HDR, and mostly avoided it because I didn't have a computer that was capable or willing to process in 32-bit. And so I've got lots of 9-shot exposures from through trips to Europe, all through the United States, that have just sat here and wasted information. So storm chases is over for me. What does a storm chaser do when there's nothing left to do? Go through all your files and do 9-stop 32-bit HDR, and hopefully the computer doesn't melt. So here we go. So I'm going to go into Lightroom. Now I should probably qualify this up front, the gear that I used and the software that I'm using, so that way if you want to try along with, you don't even need 9 stops, 2 stops, 3 stops. And when I say stop, I mean a different exposure of the same image. Could be 1 stop, half stop, doesn't even matter. And you can do this and follow along. So I shot these with my D850, and I'm going to be using both Lightroom and Photoshop. And we might go into DxO, Color Effects Pro. I haven't really decided yet. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. So this is the first time I'm ever doing it. And as always, I do these live. So if the computer does catch on fire, you will see it here first. All right, here we go. Let's see if we can do this. Let's go over to Lightroom. So you can see, and I should probably done my homework here. This is a church in Nuremberg. Don't exactly remember which one. So if somebody can help me out with that, put that in the comments. So I think if you were to go shoot this church and you're going to do 1 shot, in my opinion, as you can see here, it's impossible. You've got the bright lights coming in through the windows. It looks cool in person. It's all smoky and looks neat. But the dynamic range here, you can already see with the shadows blown out, the highlights are also blown out. So this is almost a necessity HDR image. And so we could process this just regular HDR using Lightroom, but what kind of fun is that? So what we're going to do here is we're going to attempt to do 32-bit, meaning we're going to take these 9 shots here. We're going to edit a little bit here. Going to fix the color. We're going to take out some of the distortion, and we're going to move this over all 9 into Photoshop HDR Pro. And we're going to select 32-bit and see what happens. So here we go. So with this image, the first shot of this image is what I considered the standard. And so you can see here 1, 2, 3, and I'll go ahead and select them here so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So these are my 9 shots, and I go from what I considered normal exposure to probably, let's bring this down to where it kind of looks like the other exposure. I mean, we're talking, like I said, I did 9 stops, but I've actually never really tested this in Lightroom to see. It looks closer to 5 stops to me, so I may not have done a full 9 stop. I may have had it on 3rd stop settings and took 9 shots at 3rd stops. So that's about 5 stops total dynamic range here that we're going to cram into 32 bits. So let's go over to this first image and let's start making some adjustments. So in my experience on some of these landscapes, especially with the architecture landscapes, using Adobe Landscape kind of helps out in the shadow areas. And so I'm going to click to Adobe Landscape, then we're going to do auto color just to see what it does. Yeah, it took some of that yellow out, which is kind of what I wanted anyway. And we're going to take off the sharpening because I don't want to over sharpen the image, because once I compile the 9 and then I'm going to send it back from Photoshop over to Lightroom, that's where I'll start applying sharpening. Going to remove chromatic aberration, enable the profile corrections. And so yeah, I was shooting, looks like, yep, the Nikon D850 with the 20mm lens at f9 1/3 second. So that kind of gives you a frame of reference what this exposure looks like. And that's about it. So I'm going to take this and we're going to copy and paste this across the 9 shots. So we're going to go develop settings, copy, and we want to make sure check all. And I've already hit the shift, but you can shift to hit all 9. Develop settings, paste settings, and wait. And And so now it's applying all the settings across all 9. Once that's done, we'll be able to take now all the edits over into Photoshop and apply the 32-bit HDR. So the next step is make sure you have all 9 of these still selected, and we're going to click again, and then let's see here. Let's see, what is the next step? So typically you could do photo merge here, but you're not going to get that 32 bits, so we're not going to do that. So we're going to do edit in, and you can see I have these other tools here, so I could actually send this to a few other tools that I use for HDR, but today we're going to take a full power of 32 bits. Here we go, merge to HDR. So you want to click this, merge to HDR Pro in Photoshop, and this is probably going to take 8 to 10 years. So we'll be sitting here talking for a while. I'm actually not sure exactly what it's going to do. Like I said, it's the first time I'm doing this. And it should start compiling these and sending them over, and it is. And so while this is waiting, you can see here, let's move this over. I've got the other shot, the first shot in Photoshop as a frame of reference because I want to see exactly what difference there is in doing one shot that's blown out on the shadows and the highlights and see if we can edit it comparatively to 32-bit. Obviously 32-bit is going to have a heck of a lot more data, but I'm just kind of curious, how much better is it? And so with the whole compilation here, it looks like it's stacking all these 9, so it's slowly but surely going through the process. It's creeping along. And so while we're waiting, you can see some of my tools that I have up here. So this is my Nik collection tool set. Define is perfect for removing noise. Viveza, you can add structure. HDR FX Pro, you can do the multiple images. So that's normally how I would do HDR, is I would run it through HDR FX Pro. Great tool, works fantastic. And looks like it's doing something now. So what did it do? What do I have here? What do we got? Okay, did it go through tone mapping? It's still working. It's still thinking about it. So this is where the hang up was for me. I've now got 128 gigs of RAM, super awesome, you know, I think it's the i9 processor. Matter of fact, let's take a look. I have no idea what is this computer. So I'm running 3.6 gigahertz 10 core i9 with 128 gig, the 2667 megahertz with the AMD Radeon Pro 5700 XT, 16 gigabytes. So I mean, I've got some pretty good power behind this thing, and it's still taking some time to crunch through this 32 bits worth of data. And again, I'm not real sure exactly where this is supposed to go, because I think the next step is once this thing completes, the prompt for opening up in Camera Raw is going to come up. Because if you go back to Lightroom, you know, here's your 9 exposures. This is what it looks like, and we're still waiting over here, probably forever. And I can hear the computer's fans spinning up, and it's getting hot in here. Of course, I have my jacket on. All right, any day now. Hello, hello. Yeah, it still hasn't merged yet. It's going to take a long time. Probably not the best thing to do live. But while we're waiting, we can take a look at one of these exposures. Let's take a look at, let's go over to something like this. So this is one of my exposures where you can see this was the reference exposure, and then the rest of it was the 8 stops for HDR. The highlights are blown out, the shadows are blown out. And so the idea was, let's compare and let's see if we can get to a decent edit. And with the dynamic range of the D850, it's actually really impressive. You can get some really good shadow recovery detail. Look at that. It's crazy with minimal noise. And so I haven't really tried HDR because the camera does everything I want it to do. And I'm not sure what's going on here. I don't know if I messed it up or not. Let's close out DxO. Let's see what's going on. It loaded up the 9 stacks. There's my merged HDR Pro. Is it still thinking about it? We may try this again. Let's do it one more time. Save changes? No, don't save. But what happens if I do save? Because I really wanted to run it through. Okay, so it's not done yet. It's still thinking about it. And so the typical scenario is it'll go through camera raw. Let's go kill this. Let's try it again. Don't save. All right, so I'm out. I'm done with that. Don't save that. Let's go back over to Lightroom. Let's go back to our 9 exposures. And let's see if we can make this work. 1, all the way to 9. Let's go edit in. And this time I'm not going to touch it. Merge to HDR Pro and Photoshop. And there it goes. There we go. All right, it's thinking about it. Boy, that made things super angry. So this right here, folks, I mean, if you're trying to do this and you don't have the best computer in the world, it really, really crunches. And I can hear the fan spinning up. And these are massive uncompressed. I shot these uncompressed raw. So who knows how big this is, how much data is going through this. I made sure to turn the Do Not Disturb off. I've killed all the other applications. I stopped my mail. I've done everything you can possibly do to try to make sure that this thing can crunch through it. So I'm not going to touch it this time. I'm not even going to touch the mouse. We're just going to sit here and talk. Or we can sit here and wait. We can sit here and chat. This is a good time to go through and answer questions. Still thinking about it. All right, so now it's got that prompt. And so what I expect to see here in just a second, there it goes, align selected layers based on content. And so I'm not sure what happened the last time. I probably hit cancel by accident, who knows. But here it goes. Boy, it is really, really spinning those fans up. Probably can't hear it through this mic, but this computer is usually very quiet with the 128 gigs of RAM. There it goes. Okay, so this is what you're supposed to see. All right, so I'm not exactly sure what to do next. I don't think we need to remove ghosts because it's not anything moving in this image. I hope there's nothing moving in this image. If there was something moving in this image, that's not a good thing. But this is the prompt. And so just to show you, make sure that my screen is fine and this my face isn't blocking anything. It's the mode. So you can select these different modes. You can go to 16-bit, which actually gives you a lot more control, but that's not what we want. And you can even see in 16-bit, it's just amazing amount of detail, insane amount of detail, crazy. And I would zoom this in for you so you can see it better on the screen if you're watching this right now, but I don't want to break the computer. And then you could even edit in 8-bit mode, which would give you not a lot of color options. So 32-bit, it's going to look dark. Complete toning in Adobe Camera Raw, which is what we want. So we're going to do some preliminary edits, and then we're going to go down here to this tone in ACR, Adobe Camera Raw. Creating file. Boy, it's chewing through that. All right, so I didn't give this computer enough credit. This is chewing through it. Before it would just lock up. So I had maybe 32 gigs of RAM in the older Mac. This is the 2020. I had a 2017. The 2017 just would not do it. And here we go. So that now what I expect, I'm not going to touch it. Not going to touch it. Don't touch it. What I expect to see is the Adobe Camera Raw prompt any minute now. I think this is probably going to take a while. I think this is where, well, no, because now all the 9 frames, there it goes. There goes background. There it is. So this is what you want to see. You're going to see the Adobe Camera Raw, and this is where you want to do minor edits before you put it back over into Lightroom. So what we're going to do in Lightroom is we actually might kick it back over into Photoshop after we're doing some things in Lightroom. So, and I'll show you why. There's some flexibility on both of these platforms as to why you'd want to edit in either or. But here, you can see the exposure doesn't make much sense. But what's really interesting is the shadows are no longer blown out. So it's a little bit of clipping, but the data is there. The highlights also not as blown out as they used to be. Matter of fact, they're not really blown out at all. So already I'm seeing massive improvement over that single exposure where both things were clipped. So the first thing I want to do is pull down those highlights. You got to be careful with a bright scene like this because it'll tend to turn the light blue and just kind of looks washed out. And so it's okay to leave a little bit of glow, but I'm just going to take it down until I don't have any clipping. The magic in this image is going to be in the shadows. So we're going to see how much data is really there. And it's pretty insane, the amount of data that's in there. So we can actually take this exposure up and let's just see how much is in there. That is crazy. So it pulled in all of that data in the shadows. And so now we can go do some really cool cropping up in here. And so with the exposure pulled up about 2.5 stops, I feel like what my eyes are seeing here is that the ceiling is now exposed properly, but we got a problem because the bottom area is blown out. And so we can address that a couple of ways. We can take down the highlights even more, and that might actually fix it, and it did. That's crazy. That's crazy. Why haven't I been doing 32-bit? Oh, that's right, I had a crappy computer. So with the 32 bits of data, I wasn't able to do this in traditional HDR using DxO. This wasn't happening. I was still clipping the highlights and not being able to get the detail out of the shadows at the same time. It just wasn't working. So I'm going to pull up the whites. Golly, you can even pull those up to... So we're at plus 12, and then I'm going to pull down the black a little bit to get some contrast back in that ceiling. And overall, this is looking pretty crazy. And so on something like this, you might want to use a little bit of clarity because you have all these surfaces. And just curious, just to see how much data is it. God, it doesn't even really destroy the image with the clarity. So I'm going to add just a little bit of clarity, bump that up a bit. And I've been experimenting with going reverse dehaze, kind of give it ambiance. And that actually does look pretty nice. So I'm going to just leave it at -3. And I think that's about it. I don't like the color balance, which, you know, that's not an HDR issue. That's just me. I think it's too blue. But I know if I click on one, that actually kind of fixed it right there. So I clicked on one of these windows here, and I think that resolved the issue. There we go. Now that might be a little bit too yellow. I don't know. We'll have to mess around with it a little bit. So this is where, you know, the creative license comes into play. I got to remember what exactly did it look like in this church. But just looking at the glow here on this column, and there was smoke in there because this was November 1st. I think this was All Saints Day. So they were doing the procession through the church with the smoke and the incense and stuff. It was really neat. And so I wanted to capture some of that ambient, like, just feel to it. And you can still see some of that smoke through here. This might be the color balance I was looking for. I still think it's just a tad bit yellow. So let's pull that down just a little bit. Right about there. That feels good. Now with color balance, we've blown the highlights out again. Let's pull those back down. I think that did it. So there we go. Our church in Germany is looking pretty good. So let's go to OK. We're going to commit to these changes, and then we're going to send this thing back over to Lightroom, and we're going to make some minor adjustments. So now what happens, if you got everything set up right with your computer, all I should do here is hit X up at the top, and it'll ask me, would you like to save? So we're going to see if this works. Save. Yeah, I would love to save. And this should theoretically just send it right back to Lightroom. And let's see what happens. It's like I keep feeling like the computer's just going to explode with this 32-bit, and it's chewing right through it. So everything's good. No fires. No fires, knock on. No fires yet. That is a massive file. I'm actually kind of wondering how big that file is with those 9 shots. So let's go back to, Lightroom, drum roll. Wow, it was even nice enough to put it right on. There it is. Here's our 9 stops of 32-bit data. And it should still be 32-bit here over in Lightroom, and it looks to be. So this looks like the real deal. Let's see if we can, we could probably, I was thinking about taking it over to Color Effects Pro. We should probably edit here just a little bit more. And over in Lightroom, I don't know, I just have a comfort zone with it. I'm just gonna hit auto on color, and it's gonna do exactly what I thought it was gonna do. It's gonna take out all that yellow. I don't wanna do that. It also moved it towards the green on the tint. I probably don't wanna do that either. So something in this image is tricking it. But what I'm going to do is I'm gonna add back half of what Lightroom took away of each temp and tint. And that usually gets me where I wanna be. And that's it. So let's go look at some of this data here. Look at the detail. It's just crazy, crazy detail. That's insane. There's zero noise. None. So all of this area, here, I'll show you. Let's see here, make sure I don't get lost. So you're looking at one of the underexposed exposures. Let's go actually to what I considered my normal, neutral, perfectly exposed image based on what the camera meter was telling me. So this was camera meter saying you're perfectly exposed, right? And if you had just taken this one shot, you're coming home with this, and you're going to be trying to get data out of these shadows, and you're going to get a bunch of noise. It's just what it is. But let's go back over to our 32-bit, and look at that. That's just insane. You can see like the mortar in the bricks. You can see the cracks. You can see the striations. You can see different. You can even see whatever the. What is this? What is this? That's Jesus. You can see a face. And just to give you a frame of reference, let's go back. Look at that. Let's do that again. And again, we haven't sharpened either. That's what I'm forgetting. So we might want to add just a little bit of sharpening to get some of that soft edge off before the next edits, because we don't want to propagate the softness. Some might disagree with that, but I've experimented both ways, and I just think adding just a touch of sharpness before you edit any further doesn't propagate softness throughout the rest of the editing process. So let's use Jesus as a reference here. Let's go to sharpening, and we can use Lightroom, or we can use Topaz. I'm afraid that if I send this into Topaz, it will that actually might melt the computer. So let's just stick with Lightroom for now. So I'm going to add just a little bit of sharpening, and you can see now with adding the sharpening, the crazy amount of detail that's sitting in here. And let's mask some of that out. You can hold down the Option key. I know every tutorial tells you to do this. It's obligatory, I gotta tell you. You can hold down the Option key, and you can check the mask, and you can see what's being sharpened and what's not. And so we don't want to sharpen the living whatever out of the areas here, because I don't want this to start looking mushy. And so you can also do the detail. This is very helpful. I actually use this a lot with Milky Way editing, so I don't get a bunch of weird wormy looking stuff in the sky. I just want the detail to appear where it needs to be. And then you can play around with the radius. So as you bring the radius up, you can see, it starts cutting into that image, but it starts pulling out some detail. So let's leave it about 1.2. And that looks about right. Let's go check some of these other areas. That's just insane. So you can see now there's some areas being blown out. So this is a little bit blown out. All right. And you can see the light rays coming out. Now that I'm looking at the light, so as these bright areas are looking pretty good, I'm seeing though there is some color in here I don't want. There's some purple. And I think that's exactly what was wrong with the color balance. That's what I was seeing. There's also some chromatic aberrations going on here. And so I think that another thing you can do is you can go down to the color, and you can get rid of color noise just a little bit. We could probably apply just a little bit of noise reduction. And then you can go to a manual profile for lens corrections, and then you can take the little dropper here and you can say, I don't want this color anywhere in my image, and it got rid of it. And so here we go. Look at this. Look at the detail. And I'm just blown away. I'm absolutely blown away. So you're probably wondering, what are you over here in Lightroom for? Why couldn't we just finish this off in Photoshop? You could have, but the tools over here for transforming and fixing the perspective are a lot easier. You can do the perspective warps, transforms, and all that stuff over in Photoshop. It's just I'm not that good at it, so I'm coming over here to hit auto and seeing what it will do. And I don't think it's not gonna find anything in here that's going to give me a good option. So I'm probably gonna have to manually adjust the aspect here to get these columns to line up a little bit better. And what I've noticed with some of these churches, and forgive me, Germany, but there are some asymmetrical things in them that's just what the church looks like. So it's not perfectly symmetrical. So don't worry about it too much, but try to fix it as much as you can. You can make the church look taller with aspect. You can make it look shorter. And so let's pull the aspect down a little bit. And you just kind of got to eyeball this until it looks good. Scale it up, back up again. And I think that looks much better. I've got this corner lined up, that corner's lined up. This area here looks more symmetrical with this area over here. So very simple. Now the next thing is I'm going to go through and use a little bit of tools here. And what I want is the windows to slightly blow out, but I don't want to mess with the highlights anywhere else in this image, because what happens is you can start to see the highlights getting crushed in these stones. I don't want it to touch those. So I'm going to go over here to luminance or color, and we're going to use a color mask or luminance mask. It doesn't matter. I think it would do the same on either one. Let's experiment. It looks good. I think luminance mask is going to catch those columns though, so let's go back to color. Yeah. And we're just going to add just a little bit of glow, and I'm going to add another thing too is I didn't want to add any more yellow to this image. I'm going to add some yellow to the windows. That looks pretty good. And then the next thing is we're going to do just a little bit of slight dodge and burn. So I'm going to take some radial filters and just kind of look at it. I got it set on plus 85, which is really extreme, by the way. But let's take a look. Let's see. It looks like it can use it. So I'm just going to follow the patterns of light and make it look even. And to me, this looks blown out down here. So we're going to pull that down just a smidge. And that's going to pull the whole exposure down. And so I still have the gradient tool, and I can still affect just the light exposure here. And then I can take the radial tool and pull the whole thing down. And so it's kind of a dance and back and forth. But right now I think this looks pretty dang good. So now I can go to the tone curve and let's see what we can do. Tone curve is where you really see how much data we have to work with. And so I'm just going to take a 3-point S curve, but I usually start with the shadows and I watch that histogram. And that looks pretty good to me. And then I want to bump the mids back up, but not too much. And that's going to control some of those highlights in these columns, because if you bump the mids up, the columns are going to blow out. So we want to pull that back up a little bit. And again, it's trial and error. That's it, trial and error. And then the highlights. I don't want this to look harsh. And I think that looks good. So let's look at before and after. Before, it's kind of soft, washed out a little bit. After, got some real distinct contrast going on. You can see right here in this column, I love this. And this is a detail that I don't think, and let's zoom in on this. This is the kind of detail right here. You see this little highlight beaming from the window to the right of me here. I don't think that was exposed. I don't think that ever showed up in any of the other HDRs I've ever tried to do. This is something that 32-bit has enabled, because I think it just washed all of this out, or at least or blew out the highlights because I was trying to recover the shadows. What's next? This up here is bothering me a little bit. I don't know what this is. Is that a light fixture? But I mean, just look at the detail. Look at this. You can see the mesh. You can see the wire mesh here. You can see the little shields. Fascinating place. If you ever have a chance to go to Nuremberg, Germany, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful town, beautiful churches. And I'm going back to this to go pull down on some of the yellow and trial and error, get rid of some of that green. And what I found is these European churches are very difficult to do the white balance on it, because they've got all the different colors in the stained glass. You've got weird greens that are actually in person, not from the camera. Weird greens, weird yellows, all these different striations in the stone. And so you got to just kind of pick your poison and stick with it. And you got to make it kind of the mood that you're looking for, because if you try to use auto or any of those tools, it's just gonna not look right. And so let's go over here. So having this much detail, let me tell you this much. Having this much detail, it has enabled me to really see the dodge and burn opportunities that I didn't normally see, because there's like some insane gradients in here. So like, for example, this right here, this little area, this little highlight, it's just a crazy little gradient sitting in there. And I don't think that detail was in the other image at all. All right, let's go check. So here, let's go to my normal one-shot exposure. Let's go look, and let's see what we can do with this. Let's just hit auto. So if you hit auto, this is what Lightroom thinks it's supposed to look like. No good. Let's go compare it. Compare. Let's drag this over. So you can see one shot on the left, 9 stop, 32-bit HDR on the right. Crazy. And you can see the dilemma. You can see. So, from what your eye saw, it might have actually looked more like the one shot. So you can make the argument that, okay, maybe the HDR isn't, really capturing reality. But, from just a beauty standpoint, trying to capture the beauty of this church it's very difficult with this kind of exposure. And so one shot on the left, and then here we are on the right with our 32-bit 9 stops. So far, so good. All right, so what's next? I think now let's go do some minor edits on the highlights. So this is global editing, and I just eyeball this, and what I'm looking at is I'm picking a spot on the image that's kind of like my focal point. And right now I'm really focused on this column. And I think if I get the highlights right here, everything else is gonna look all right. So about -67, we're good to go. And I think we're okay on the shadows. Well, no, pulling the shadows up a little bit really did help. And I don't think we need to mess with the whites, because I think that's gonna make it look too harsh. I don't want this to look harsh. Let's go look at what we do with the black. All right, so I don't have much headroom left in the shadows. So those shadows were definitely blown out. It was very, very dark. Even with 32-bit 9 stops, it's still not a lot of headroom sitting in here. We did edit a little bit over in Photoshop, but I would expect to have a little bit more to play with. And I think I'm actually going to push the black up a little bit. And here we are. So now this is where the art comes in. So let's go and let's try to look at some of these areas. So what I'm noticing, and this is what the church looks like, is the saturation down in the columns and in the shadows looks a little weird, but that's just what it looked like. The columns were darker at the bottom for whatever reason. So whatever stones they were using looked a bit darker. And so you can fix that by taking just a little bit of desaturation, just taking a little bit of that color out. Let's go back over here, do on the other corner here, and then up here at the top a little bit. So I'm just desaturating some of those things. Looks a little bit better. And then another thing I'm noticing is that some of the actual highlights don't make sense relative to the other light. So I'm going to pull some more radial filter tools to do some big global edits to get some of those shadows back up and rolling. That looks good right there. And I want to do just a subtle bump right here. And the reason I make this small like this is so I can see the relative change and differences between all of these little spots in the image. Now what we do is we're going to crop. Now you could make the argument, don't crop yet, because if you do all these edits on it, and if you crop now, you've lost all the information. So I don't really care. So I'm just going to edit the crop. And we don't want to do that. So let's go back to no. And I'm going to crop this for our favorite application on planet Earth, and that's Instagram. So 4:5. And that looks good. That actually looks surprisingly good. Better than I thought it was going to be. And now I'm going to go back to my adjustment that I put for the windows, and we're going to see what exactly it is I'm impacting, because I think I messed that up a little bit. Let's get rid of that. Let's pull that out. Let's get this over here. So I messed that one up a little bit. I'm trying to cheat here. It's not going to work. What I'm trying to do is really just control the brightness of these windows without affecting the columns. But the brightness is so similar, the color is so similar, that masking over here isn't really working. So it looks like this is going to be the hard way. Yeah. But that's okay. So when I say the hard way, that means you got to go do all of these little minute edits. And really, it's a very complicated dodge and burn here because of all the different colors in those columns. And so all I'm doing now is just eyeballing the different intensity of light that I see throughout this image that doesn't make sense. And then I think I want to do some focal points here. So I love the way this window looks over here. I'm going to intentionally blow this one out just a little bit, kind of give it some side glow. And we're going to add some warmth to it, just to give it something. It looks a little too green too. All right. This I'm happy with. All right, so to recap, what are we doing here? This is my church from Nuremberg, Germany. I wish I had done my research before starting this live so I could tell you exactly what church this is. If anyone knows what church this is, please put it in the comments. I will definitely go Google this afterwards and make sure I know my information. What we're doing is doing 32-bit HDR. We took 9 stops of information from 9 shots from my D850. We ran that through Photoshop HDR Pro in 32-bit mode, made some minor edits over in Photoshop, kicked it back to Lightroom, made a little bit more fine-tune adjustments, did a little bit of dodge and burn, some color adjustment in Lightroom. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably kick this back over into Photoshop. And we might not do this in this video, but what I would typically do is take this back over to Photoshop and actually do the traditional dodge and burn. And I think one last step for this video. So I want to show you something. I want to show you what DxO can do for you. I'm just blown away by the detail. This is a 20mm lens from really far away, capturing wire mesh on a ceiling like this. It's just crazy. All right, so let's take this. I'm still seeing some areas here. We could sit here all night long and go through an just infinite amount of touch up on some of this glow, and it could take forever. So I'm not trying to reach perfection in this video. I just wanted to show you what 32-bit looks like, compare it to the one shot, show you that, hey, look, there's no way you could have gotten this shot to look like this with one shot. And I'm thinking now, there's no way you could have gotten it to look like this without doing 32-bit, because I've tried before with the 16-bit, it just does not work. So I still had shadows blown out. I didn't get these unique highlight details coming in from the side lining. It just wasn't there. The detail wasn't there. This is crazy. This is insane. So we're going to kick this over into Color Effects Pro. I'm not sure what this is going to do because I'm pretty sure this is a giant file. Let's see what it does. Let's see. We're going to prepare this for editing, and it's going to sit there and probably think about it for a while. So what do you think? Tell me in the comments. Do you like this kind of content? Do you like me going through doing this live? Do you like me doing these videos, literally doing this for the first time and kind of taking you through the steps as I'm going along, learning? So, hey, it did it. It processed. Ooh, it's thinking about it. So we're now in DxO. This is my primary manipulation editing platform, if you will. And I go and I build custom filters here. And the first one is Tonal Contrast, and this is where I try to add a little bit of structure, get the contrast right, and then I continue moving forward with Pro Contrast. So let's take a look at this. So with tonal contrast, we got highlights, midtones, and shadows. And I do want to add structure to the highlights here because I want some of that chicken wire, and because I think that's what that is. I think that's wire. It's just lattice. It's a beautiful lattice in these windows to hold that stained glass together. I want that to be very present, and then also want the shadows to have some detail as well up in these ceilings. But I don't want the image to look dirty. It could look dirty quickly, and so you don't want this to look like a mess. But I'm making global edits with fine adjustment. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Pro Contrast. And we're going to see if we have a color cast here to correct. And yeah, it's going to think it's too yellow, but that's okay. I think I'm going to take just a little bit of that yellow out. And then I'm going to hit Correct Contrast. And then where the magic starts happening and pulling that HDR detail out is Dynamic Contrast. And so you can really make this image shine because it's got tons of detail in here. So you can see as I'm pulling that dynamic contrast up, it's really making the highlights relative to the shadows pop dynamically. And it's adjusting it without crushing the colors. That's why I like the Color Efex Pro. Maybe that's why they named it that. It doesn't oversaturate when you add contrast, and that's what I like. And so I'm going to add just a little bit of dynamic contrast. And let's go see if we're clipping anywhere. Just a little bit. Not a lot. I would think that it'd be more than that. So we're going to protect some of these highlights. And we're going to protect some of these shadows. And there we go. Clipping's gone. Now, another tool that I like using is Detail Extractor. Got to be careful with this one because it could just make it look like a massive structured mess. But it's good for selective adjustments. And so maybe I only want the stained glass here to have detail. And so you can take a plus sign, add it to the stained glass, and it's going to take the effect away from everywhere else. And so now that stained glass is really popping out. And let's see if we can go add it to this stained glass. And let's go add it to this stained glass. And I'm going to use, instead of normal, we're going to do fine detail because those are fine details. And then we're going to pull that down just a little bit because I don't want the full effect. And that, look at that. So and I'm gonna exaggerate the effect so you can see. So we're gonna really crush this thing. So there's Detail Extractor on, Detail Extractor off. And it's doing a really good job of only attacking that stained glass. So let's pull that back a little bit. Let's go down to probably about 10. That looks good. And then I'm going to go protect some of these areas with a minus sign that it might have overlapped. I don't want any of that Detail Extractor up here in the ceiling because it'll start looking dirty. Looks good. Now, if this was a landscape, I'd probably move into a graduated neutral density filter, take it down a notch on the top, bump it up on the bottom. But I think this is a little different. Actually, no, that looks pretty good. We might go opposite. We might actually bump the top up and bump the bottom down. Just a little bit. Looks good. Next is add the vignette. And so I don't typically add vignette in Lightroom. I always do it over here. And this is Color Efex Pro, Darken, Light, and Center, which is typically used for portrait photography, but I love using it in other photography, so especially landscapes. And what this will enable you to do is you can pick a center of the image and you can brighten it, and then you can change the center size. So you can actually zoom in on someone's face and make that the highlight. So here we're just going to keep it a big general center, and I'm going to test out some of these areas that, and you can see now it's starting to make this whole image pop. And so now I'm going to do some dodge and burn in here by taking the minus sign, and I'm going to go remove in selective areas this vignette. And this is another powerful tool inside Color Efex Pro. You can't really do this in Lightroom. And so we're going to take that effect away to kind of give more highlights back. And it selects the color, so it's only going to impact the color that you select. Let's go do this over here. And then I'm going to go add the highlight back to this window. And we're going to go hide the highlight back over here on this window, add that back. And then the last step is I'm going to add a real vignette. So I typically use Vignette Lens and add just a subtle, maybe -2, -3 and that just kind of boxes it in. And if I see any areas that's too dark, looks like it's crushed the color a little bit, then I come back to the darken, lighten center, and I remove some of the effect. And so I think some of these areas did get a little too dark. Maybe up here a little bit. And let's do before and after. That's beautiful. Let's look at tonal contrast before and after. All right, so this looks great. And then you hit save. And then another thing I like about this is it doesn't eat your layer, it adds a new layer. So now I've got the original HDR that we did the edits. I've got this one. So you can take this one over to Photoshop, you can take the other one over to Photoshop, stack them as layers, and then I can take my Color Effects Pro edits that might look extreme over here and then blend them into the old layer. So I can add the whole composition of Color Effects Pro edits in a subtle fashion by adjusting the opacity in Photoshop. So saving image, it's going to kick it back over to Lightroom, and here we are. And so now we can take a look at before and after. Let's go over here to before and after. So this is our final product. So we went from one shot, and this is Lightroom Auto, one shot, no edits. This is what, if you had taken, let's just say you were shooting JPEG, this is what the camera would have probably rendered on one shot when it says the exposure is perfect. This on the right side is 32-bit HDR. Insane amount of data. Insane. Insane. I don't know if I'll take this trouble on every image that I'll do, but it certainly is worth playing around with and going back and checking to see if you've actually got the data to do it. If you've got the data to do it and you've shot some HDR, thing, and I'll leave you with this is the HDR by itself, and this is the Color Effects Pro. Both look great. It's very, very hard to distinguish what the edits were, but they're subtle. It's easier to see here. It's probably hard to see on your screen, but this is perfect for me. So now all you got to do is export it from Lightroom. What I'm going to do is get off this video here is I'm going to go over to Photoshop and dodge and burn for the next 4 weeks on this image. And I'm going to hit every single bit of grout on this church. So thank you for joining me. If you want to find me, go find me over at Instagram, Adam Kyle Jackson. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, hit your notifications. Send me some comments. Tell me what you think. You have any ideas for me to do another video like this? Go for it. I might do it. So all of these are live. You just watched me do 32-bit HDR for the first time ever on a church in Germany. All right, y'all have a good night. Yeah, it's time to go check out the grout. I'm gonna dodge and burn every square inch of this grout in this church. You'll see.